Hi everyone, Dave Yaden here, host of How God Works. We've had a lot of new listeners join us over the past year. And so while we're hard at work on our next season of the show coming this fall, we thought we'd dig into the archives and share a few of our favorite episodes. Ones that explore some of the biggest, most universal questions and challenges in life. And we'll do it, as always, through the combined lens of spirituality and the science behind it. So whether these episodes are new to you, or offer a chance for further reflection, we hope you'll enjoy them. And if you do, tell your friends. Our show has grown thanks to you spreading the word. So please share it with friends, family, or anyone else who you think might enjoy it. We'll be back in September with all new episodes for Season 7 of How God Works. See you then. People say college is a time for experimentation. For some, that may be true. But for me, not so much. I was your class A1 nerd. The only alcohol I drank was at a wine tasting class. And the only drugs I saw were the ones my hallmates passed around. Friday nights meant more space in the library to study. I learned everything I could about spirituality, science, and religion from books. If I was going to learn more and expand my horizons, that was the best way to do it, right? Right? Well, maybe. But sometimes, if you're looking to understand the spiritual, a feeling that often seems beyond words, experience can be as important as facts.
I had the experience of watching myself kind of explode in a cloud of blue Post-it notes and then fall to the ground and then turn into a coat of paint.
That's best-selling author Michael Pollan describing his own psilocybin trip. This wasn't a joyride. This was research for his book on their mind-altering powers. Psilocybin is the chemical that puts the magic in so-called magic mushrooms. He's among a growing community of academics and researchers studying these banned substances. Ones that, for the past few decades, had mostly been associated with fish concerts and aging hippies. But before they were seen as taboo party drugs, psychedelics like psilocybin and the DMT and ayahuasca were used for centuries in many cultures to open the mind and heal its ails. And they can lead to truly profound experiences.
They were some of the more meaningful experiences of my life, and they taught me things about my mind and the mind that I didn't know before.
But if not used carefully, they can also lead to some frightening and potentially dangerous outcomes. And that's where the wisdom of the ancient ritualized use of psychedelics comes in.
We've been grasping at the meaning and the proper use of psychedelics for a very long time. But had we been humble enough to look around the world and see how traditional cultures use them, we could have saved ourselves a lot of trouble.
On this episode of How God Works, we'll talk with Michael Pollan about the psychedelic experience and the promise these chemicals hold to heal depression and distress.
That people could take a chemical produced by a mushroom and see God, or lose their fear of death.
And to researcher David Yaden about the links these drugs have to profound mystical experiences.
Extreme, transformative, once-in-a-lifetime kind of experiences where you feel truly at one with all things.
And why a little help goes a long way.
If you're going to surrender, if you're going to allow your ego to dissolve, you have to feel supremely safe. And that's the job of the guide.
I'm Dave Yaden, and this is How God Works. Michael has written many thought-provoking best-selling books, and a theme that unites them all is how food, and especially plants, interact with human desires. And since his first book, aptly named The Botany of Desire, there's one particular urge that has piqued his interest.
Since Botany of Desire, I've had this long-standing interest in the desire to change consciousness, to transcend our ordinary selves and lives. What's that about? You would think that, consuming plants that change your consciousness, there are a lot of reasons not to do it from an evolutionary standpoint. But they must offer something, or the drug takers would have been weeded out of our species a long time ago.
So he started his own research, which, as I mentioned before, didn't only involve reading about psychedelics, but also taking them. And it's there that after seeing himself explode in a cloud of blue Post-it notes and fall to the floor as paint, his trip took a more, you could say, poetic turn.
And then this was followed by a sense of merging. I mean, without a self, you have no walls where you're part of everything. In my case, what I merged with was very specific. It was a piece of music that the guide was playing. It was a unaccompanied cello suite, Bach, which Yo-Yo Ma was playing. And I became identical with this piece of music. It was me, I was it. There was no subject-object difference. That had completely melted away. And it was the most wonderful experience. Was that a spiritual experience? It sure felt that way. There was nothing supernatural about it. There was nothing about a divinity. But it actually afterwards, I had always associated spiritual experience with the supernatural, that these were experiences that could not be explained in any other way except, divine activity of some kind, or something that defied all the laws of nature. But I came out of it, and out of all my researches on psychedelics, with a different understanding of what spirituality was. And that was that spiritual experience is a kind of a deeper connection than we have in ordinary life, a connection that transcends ego, that breaks down those walls. And whether it's with nature or a piece of music or the universe or other people, you feel more deeply connected than you ever have. And that's my kind of working definition of spiritual experience now.
There are many ways to pursue a mystical state, a state where you lose yourself and merge with something greater. But broadly speaking, they can be divided into two types. The so-called right-handed ones sit within traditional religions and take a good deal of practice and effort to master. Think meditation in Buddhism or Christianity, or the whirling Sufis of Islam. The left-handed ones sit outside of institutionalized religion and offer quicker routes. That's where things like magic mushrooms and ayahuasca come in.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's a very similar state. But I think that there are many connections between meditation and a psychedelic experience that I don't think are adequately appreciated, because usually the psychedelic experience is discussed in terms of the kind of climax of it, when you have hallucinations and there are a lot of fireworks. There's a lot going on. And meditation we think of as a very calm process, although it isn't always. Most of the psychedelic experience is the denouement after that peak. And you spend hours in this meditative state that is where you have regained the ability to focus your thoughts, decide to think about something, remember something, dwell on a person, something at the peak of the experience you could not do. Your mind was just going to go where it was going to go. But you're really focused and you're not easily distracted. And it's kind of a wonderful part of the experience. And you can do mental work in this trance-like zone. So I think that approximates meditation in a lot of ways. And I, like many people, found that after psychedelic experience, I could meditate with more pleasure and success, although I use that word advisedly, since meditators aren't supposed to think that way. But of course they all do.
True. It's interesting because what it suggests, and we'll need more research on this, but it almost suggests that you could use psychedelics as kind of the kickstart, right? To meditation.
Yes.
It'll give you the boost to get to that mental state that if you just started with the practice itself might take a good long time to be able to self-induce.
Yes. You have a sense of the destination. You've laid down tracks, meditative tracks, and that you can pick up on them much more easily. And I know from in my own experience that it's been very helpful. And one of the things I meditate on are various mysterious images I had during psychedelic experience. Many, if not most, of that generation who brought Buddhism to America, the Jack Kornfields and John Kabat-Zinn, and all these people started with psychedelics, and then we're looking for a way to turn that kind of consciousness from a very occasional event to a regular practice, and they found that in Buddhism.
That's true, because you probably can't do psychedelics every week. Very bad idea.
No, very bad idea. You can't do it. You'll never get anything else done.
If drugs, even therapeutically administered, aren't your thing, psychedelics aren't the only way to have a mystical experience. Intense meditation and similar practices can alter consciousness too. And strange as it might seem, sometimes people can even have a full-blown mystical experience out of nowhere. That's what happened to psychologist David Yaden.
Basically, it started as a heat in my chest, which I initially interpreted as entirely physiological. But that heat spread over my entire body. And so as this is happening, I'm wondering what's going on here. And at some point, a voice in my mind said, "This is love." At which point I felt that I went out of my body or into an inner space. I could see 360 degrees around me, this sort of intricate fabric stretching out. And that feeling of heat, which now I'm feeling as love, reached an absolute boiling point. And after what felt like months, but which was probably only a few minutes, I opened my eyes. My body was laughing and crying at the same time. And in the days and weeks afterwards, things around me seemed new, as if I had just been reborn into the world. And this experience was and remains probably the most meaningful moment of my life. And amidst all of those very positive changes was the question, what the just happened to me?
These random experiences, and even the ones that come from intense meditation, present a problem, though. People either have to train for years to have them, or have no control over when or if they'll ever happen. That poses a problem for spiritual seekers and scientists alike. The experiences can be few and far between. But with psychedelics, you can just eat or drink something, and within an hour or so, be on your way to a seeming higher plane. That makes mystical experiences much more available, both to those who want them and to those who want to study them, like David.
The scholar of religion, Houston Smith, used to write on the board 2 experiences. One was triggered spontaneously, and one was triggered by psychedelics, and he would ask classes at Princeton to try to guess which one was triggered by psychedelics and which one was triggered spontaneously, and people would guess at chance. So when you read descriptions of the phenomenology of these experiences, how it feels, they look virtually identical.
His mystical moment led him to study religion, psychology, and neuroscience in graduate school, and then to a position at the Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research at Johns Hopkins, where, as you might guess from its name,
we study these kinds of experiences, but induced through psychedelic substances.
And just in case you're wondering if the drugs really produce the same type of mystical experience as do other routes, studies show they do. They lead to what David calls a self-transcendent state.
A self-transcendent experience we define as a transient mental state involving some degree of self-loss and or feelings of connectedness. For example, flow, mindfulness, awe, peak experience, and mystical type experiences. And of course, there's a spectrum of intensity. Some of those are quite subtle. For example, a feeling of mindfulness, whereas others are extreme, transformative, once-in-a-lifetime kind of experiences, like a mystical experience where you feel truly at one with all things.
I know in some of the work that your colleagues have been doing at Johns Hopkins with psilocybin ingestion, people are coming out reporting, I think like 75% or so, people are coming out reporting that it was one of the most meaningful experiences of their lives.
I think this is one of the most important findings in psychology from the past 2 decades, up there with marriage and childbirth and these truly significant milestones in a life. I mean, reliably, 2/3 of samples sitting or lying down on a couch in a room in a lab for 6 hours will afterwards say that that was one of their top 5 most meaningful moments in life. That's not just asking them right afterwards. If you ask them 2 months later, if you ask them even 16 months later, they'll still say, yes, that was one of the most meaningful moments in my life. I find that absolutely mind-blowing.
I want to linger here for a second. As a researcher, I'm particularly fascinated by how experiments are conducted. And as David just described, here, the taking of psilocybin is stripped bare of much of the traditional context and rituals that usually accompany it. Traditionally, shamans not only supervise the experience, they also provide more active guidance, usually chanting, rhythmically clapping their hands, or beating drums during psychedelic ceremonies. These help calm people's minds and nerves, making them feel more comfortable and connected. The shamans also spend time talking with people, preparing them for their journey. And throughout the trip, they're there to guide them. The main point is to create a safe and sacred place for the journey toward transcendence. While the experiments at Hopkins don't use drums or songs, they do retain some of the traditional elements, at least in spirit. First, there is comfort. The experiments don't take place in a sterile exam room like you might find at your primary care physician's office. There's a nice soft couch to recline on, soft lighting, some art on the wall. The goal is to make people feel comfortable and safe at the start. Second, there's a guide. A member of the research team that participants have met several times before remains beside them, both as the effects of the drugs slowly come up over the first 30 minutes to an hour, and then during what is usually the 6-hour or so main part of the experience.
The guides are generally instructed to let the experience happen. They're kind of like psychological midwives. Mm-hmm. So rather than intervening, the idea is to let the experience take its course. Now, of course, they're there. If the participant needs support, they can ask for a handhold, or they can discuss what they're experiencing with the guide. But the idea when you're a participant in a psilocybin study is to try to go inward and to trust, let go, and be open to the experience itself.
In essence, these midwives are kind of like modern-day shamans. They're there to help shepherd the experience. And this one, as Michael Pollan also noted, is really important.
If you're going to surrender, if you're going to allow your ego to dissolve, you have to feel supremely safe. And that's the job of the guide, one of the jobs of the guide, that they're providing a container where, the phone's not going to ring, the FedEx guy's not going to come to the door, so you can let go. And that's very, very important, because if your ego begins to dissolve in a situation where you feel any sense of threat or insecurity, you're going to fight to hold on to it, and you're going to be in this battle between the part of yourself that is falling apart and the part that is just clinging to order. And that, I think, is the source of a lot of bad trips.
These trips are not to be undertaken lightly. They are arduous journeys. And while they can be amazing, transformative, and fill you with a sense of beauty or love, they can also take a turn, become terrifying, and fill you with dread. Unfortunately, Michael has had that experience too.
The terrifying was an experience on a pretty obscure psychedelic called 5-MeO-DMT, which is a chemical produced, and this is going to sound weird, in the venom of the Sonoran desert toad. And they milk the toads for this venom. It was an experience where I lost any sense of self, but I lost any sense of anything except this kind of chaos of energy. It felt like I was in the middle of the Big Bang. I felt this thunderous roar in my head, but it wasn't my head. It was, and it extended beyond my skull to take in everything. And it was quite disturbing at the time. And I was very happy when it ended. The best thing about this trip is it only lasts about 10 minutes, although you have no sense of time. It felt a lot longer. So there was an ego death there too. I had no self, but I didn't merge into anything else except this maelstrom. It was a very productive thing to do. although frightening too. I mean, I was very nervous about it. You know, going deep into your mind is a scary place to go because the drugs really contain no information, no imagery, no narrative. They're catalysts and for what's going on in your mind in a certain very specific situation. So the reason I stress the importance of having a guide is to maximize that sense of safety.
But the guide's role doesn't end when the trip is over. They meet with people several times afterward to help them make sense of what happened.
These kinds of experiences can be disruptive to one's life, and the hope is that they'll be positively disruptive. But any kind of disruption can be psychologically challenging, and so having social support is, I think, profoundly important. Because these experiences, even when they're challenging or even quite negative, can ultimately end up as very positive. So in other words, someone crying for 45 minutes isn't necessarily a sign that the experience has gone badly. They may be mourning someone who they never took the time to mourn, or simply grappling with very difficult psychological material.
So I want to touch on those sessions. What typically happens there? Can you give us a sense of what that conversation is like?
These conversations are really driven by the participant. And so the guide is just there to provide basically supportive psychotherapy, to be an empathetic ear, to just listen and respond to the participant who may just want to discuss what they experienced. And importantly, the guide or the clinician is not imposing their particular worldview or interpretation on the experience. It's really led by the participant, and the participant is just invited to share what happened. And the guide or the clinician is there to be a supportive and empathetic listener.
And research shows that the results of those discussions can change people's outlooks on life in amazing ways, even helping them come to terms with facing death from a terminal disease.
We shouldn't be calling it psychedelic therapy. It's psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. That it is a package, and you can't divorce these elements, the context. And this is one of the lessons that we should have learned from the way traditional cultures use psychedelics. To hear the stories of a spiritual experience that people I was interviewing were having, that people could take a chemical produced by a mushroom and see God, or have a completely altered sense of their relationship to the natural world, or lose their fear of death.
People will say things like, I now feel a part of everything rather than apart from everything. And something about that shift makes accepting the inevitable more possible.
We're at a kind of spiritual inflection point in society right now. It's something I've talked about before because it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to make this podcast in the first place. People are leaving traditional faiths in great numbers, but they're not all becoming atheists. Most of them are looking for other ways to be spiritual. So I asked Michael if he thought that psychedelics might have an important role to play here.
Oh, without question. I mean, I think there is a hunger for spiritual experience. There is a desire, I think, to have a counterweight to lives that are highly materialistic, busy. It is a vacation from ordinary life. And I think the desire for transcendence is universal.
It's called transcendence because the beauty of the state transcends what we normally experience in this world. It's a glimpse into the beyond, and an embrace by the divine or by the universe, depending on your beliefs. But there's no denying its allure. Even Albert Einstein, who didn't believe in a personal God, felt that the feeling of mystical transcendence was among the most beautiful and profound emotional experiences available to humans. He said, "He to whom this emotion is a stranger is as good as dead." And right there's the reason that so many people chase it. Now, it's true you don't need psychedelics to get there. You can use meditation or other spiritual practices, but relying on them to reach transcendence can take years. Psychedelics are faster, but with that speed comes risk. So if you're looking for a quick route to an altered state, remember not to lose sight of the rituals that go with the chemicals. They're part of the same package. They work together as a prescription. By splitting them, you're unlikely to get the best effect. And when it comes to feeling yourself slip away, I think that's not a risk worth taking. How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman. Our producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our intern is Annika de Vries. Executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Merritt Jacob is our mix engineer and composed our theme, which was arranged by Chloe DeSteno. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. If you want to learn more, you can find our website at howgodworks, all one word, .org, or follow me on X or Blue Sky at David DeSteno.